Hello everyone, welcome to another patron voted shmup review. Today I am talking about Ibara. Shout outs to the patrons for supporting the channel. So over the past few days I've been putting in the credits, putting in the hours, and have come to the conclusion, as you can tell by the video title, that this game is absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend it. It is a true hidden gem if I ever think of one, because as much as I've heard about Ibara in the past and kind of played it a little bit here and there, it wasn't until I really sunk my teeth into it for this review that I realized just how overlooked and awesome this game is. So part of this review will be me explaining the game, explaining how it works, and going over the PS2 port. But another part is trying my best to inspire people to maybe take a second look at Ibara and give it a chance, even though it may not be the most accessible game to play. And I think that's probably its biggest reason why it's not very popular, is just people have trouble playing it. So I'll be going over the different ways to play it in this video as well. But before we do that, let's talk about the interesting history of Ibara, because it's actually really cool. So essentially, Ibara is the Reese's peanut butter cup of shmups, where on one hand you have the delicious chocolate that is Cave, and then on the other you have the raising Yagawa peanut butter. You fuse them together and Ibara is what you get. The story basically goes, for people who don't know, from what I understand doing my reading and stuff, is that after Yagawa made Battle Garegga, he was approached by Akeda from Cave to say, hey, make Battle Garegga, but for Cave. And this is what you get. And I think it's actually a really cool blend of styles, because you can definitely see certain elements that are absolutely Battle Garegga Yagawa. And then there are other elements where you can say, oh, I can see Cave having some input here. I can see some Akeda touches here and there. So it's actually a really nice combination that basically is what I'm looking for, because those are my two favorite shmup studios coming together, right? It's like the Marvel versus Capcom of shmups or something like that. So again, it surprises me how overlooked the game is, considering how interesting its history is and how popular its separate creators are coming together, right? So just the basics is that this is much more of a successor to Garegga than it is something like a Dodonpachi or something like that. So if you come to this looking for your typical Cave experience, you're not going to get it. Instead, you're going to get kind of a hybrid between a raising style bullet hell and a Cave style bullet hell, but definitely much more along the lines of Battle Garegga. For instance, let's talk about the basics. So you got the rank system of Battle Garegga. It is very close, at least on the surface, to how Battle Garegga works, where basically rank is the dynamic difficulty of the game, if people aren't familiar with that term, where the longer you survive, the more bombs you shoot, the more bullets you shoot, the less you die, the harder the game gets, the more you hoard lives as well. And so I'm guessing the theory behind that is, how do we get credits out of people faster? I think that's kind of the basis of how rank was designed, but nonetheless, it has made for a very interesting gameplay experience. And of course, many very fantastic shmups have rank systems in them. So for better or worse, they are what they are. And I think if you are familiar with Battle Garegga's rank system, you're going to be right at home with this one, because looking at just the information I could find, they looked very, very similar. Where, again, the basic strategies of avoiding rank in the game are: one, don't shoot bullets when you don't need to; two, don't collect excess power-ups if you don't need to; three, try to avoid sealing bullets. That means like stuffing the bullets from coming out. You can do that on some enemies. And then also making sure you're not just launching bombs. And of course, the number one rule, don't hoard lives. You got to plan out your strategic suicides. What's interesting about these style of games, as opposed to something like a traditional Cave bullet hell, is that scoring is very interlinked with survival. Whereas in some Cave games, of course, Dodonpachi, a great example of this, scoring and survival are not linked whatsoever. Like, I got a 2-all in Dodonpachi and my score was absolutely terrible. But in this style of game, whether it's Ibara or Battle Garegga, having a high score is going to really help contribute to survival, because essentially what you do is you build up your score, you get an extend, and then you suicide that extend to drop the rank. So you're always constantly battling with that rank, just like in Battle Garegga. And I have seen comments in the past that, oh, what if you kind of just ignore the rank? And I've always kind of thought this as well initially before I got my Garegga 1cc, is like, maybe if I'm just stubborn enough, you can ignore the rank and still do well just through sheer fundamental skills. I'm here to tell you that while it is possible, of course, that is insanely difficult to do. For my review, I actually did a rank denying run where I basically just jacked up the rank really high. And oh boy, it might actually be harder than Garegga high rank. It was absolutely ruthless. Another interesting difference from Ibara from Battle Garegga is Battle Garegga is known for having all different types of ship types. The whether it's the Maho ships or the traditional Garegga ships. I think there's like 8 in total. But in Ibara, you just get 2. And what's kind of weird and interesting is that the side you play is actually how you select the ship. So if you're on the player 1 side, you get Bond, the Type 1 ship. Then on the player 2 side, you get Dyne, the Type 2 ship. The difference is that Bond is faster, has a narrower shot, and has a weaker attack. Sound a little bit familiar? And then Dyne is much slower, has a wider shot, and has stronger attacks. Again, sounds familiar, right? I think that's a little bit of a cave influence with DOJ, right? With like the Type 1 and Type 2 and DOJ, A and B, that kind of reminds me of that. But anyway, another thing about the ship types is that just like in Garegga, the way you select the ship actually gives it different qualities. So there's actually 4 different subtypes, A, B, C, or D. I'm sorry if this gets a little confusing. But essentially for me, I always play Type D, which is the faster ship. I think playing fast ships is just the way to go in these types of games. That's my opinion. But Ibara, especially, if you play Dyne Type A, you're in for a turtle experience, right? Because the ship speeds are nowhere near as quick as something like Garegga, right? You're not going to find a Miyamoto type ship in this game. So I play Type 1 with a D subtype. And the interesting thing about this game, too, that's a little bit different from Garegga, is Garegga has a 3rd button. So it has shot, bomb, and option, and you control the options. Ibara doesn't. So this is kind of a little bit more along the lines of a cave where it just has shot and bomb. But the way you can kind of control the way your shot works, like there are options, is kind of weird. You pick up options, but you control them with your shot, where you can just aim it and hold it, and kind of like a concentrated shot, like in Garegga, or like in Donpachi. So that's pretty interesting. Overall, I found the option control in Ibara to be a little bit more challenging to use than in Garegga. Another weird note that I came across is usually with option control, the way it works is if you move left, your guns point right. If you move right, your guns point left. So they move opposite to you. Not in Ibara, they move the same direction as you. So if you want to aim left, you move left. If you want to aim right, you move right. I don't know if that's more or less intuitive. It's a little bit weird to me because I'm so used to the other way around, but I just noticed that it's probably more intuitive thinking about it, but again, it's hard to tell. So that's kind of the basics of how the rank, control, and ship selections work. Other things to note are the bombing system. This is really important to understand because I didn't actually understand the bombing system for the first few hours of the game and I got totally destroyed. So the way the bombing system work is very similar to Battle Garegga, where you fly around, you pick the bomb fragments, and then they come together. And you either spend the bomb fragments on kind of just a generic screen clearing bomb, basically like Silver Sword's bomb, or you can save them up, and if you hold the bomb button, you charge up the bomb and shoot like this charged bomb shot. That's actually very powerful. The only drawback of using this, because at first I was like, whoa, this is really OP. Why don't people just use this all the time? Well, it turns out because it jacks up your rank really high. So that's the trade-off. But there are certain patterns of the game where it just feels like the game's telling you, okay, use a charge bomb here. So what's really interesting about Ibara compared to Garegga, at least from my experience so far, is how you route your bomb usage is actually a little bit different, where in Garegga you usually throwing bombs all over the place and you only stock them up here or there. Where in this game you kind of, at least for me, for survival, you want to stock up those bombs in the stages and then use them on the bosses. Another interesting thing about the game is it has different option types. So in Garegga, you just pick up your options, right? So if you're Gain, you're throwing the swords. If you're Moto, you're throwing the bomb thingies or whatever. In this, there's actually like different weapons that you pick up. So there's the machine gun, there's the rocket launcher, there's the flamethrower. I think there's homing rockets. There's tons of different options, and then you can combine them together in different combinations. I think that is one of the most interesting, unique aspects of the game. From what I could tell playing it, like the rockets and the flamethrower were the way to go, and like the machine gun was like the crappy option that you want to try to avoid. That was at least my experience with it. Maybe the machine gun's better than I realized. But overall, those are the similarities and differences between Garegga. You're going to be very familiar with this game coming into Garegga. I would say if you haven't played a Yagawa style game before, Ibara might be a little bit tricky to get into because it's a little bit more punishing with these types of things. Like the rank seems to get high real quick on it, at least from what I've experienced. Whereas in Garegga, you get a little bit more leeway in the beginning. You don't really suffer the rank until stage 5, in my opinion. But in this game, that rank will whoop you pretty quick. So, and even just the first stage, it just feels survival wise, the game is a little bit more punishing up front, but you do have a lot of interesting weapons. So I've been talking to people, like I talked to Plasmo, and he mentioned that he thinks it's probably pretty similar to Garegga's difficulty once you get the hang of it. But I was getting completely whooped, but my rank route was pretty bad. So another thing that I quickly want to mention is the visual style of the game, because again, you can see the cross pollination here, where you get the kind of World War II esque, ship design and enemy design of Battle Garegga. But then because it's a cave game, they throw in some gothic Lolita, like Death Smiles type influences in the game, which I think is actually really cool. And I think Ibara actually looks cooler than Death Smiles aesthetically, where the bullets have this sort of gothic look to them. They are colored and you can actually see them. Thank you, Cave. I would love to listen to the conversation where they're like, okay, Yagawa, you make great games and everything, but your bullet design is pretty whack. We're going to throw in some cave bullets in this. And I think it works really well. But as far as the actual patterns, it is definitely much more along the lines of a Battle Garegga. Like there's some classic Battle Garegga patterns in the game, like the spinning turret thing. Like a lot of bosses have that spinning turret thing. A ton of bosses in this game have that. It's really fun to point out the parallels in the bullet design. No black hearts to be found anywhere. None of those Vulcan attacks, thank God. So another reason I appreciate Ibara is you're spared that attack, thank God. Or I guess thank Akeda. So the last thing about the gameplay that I want to talk about before we get into talking about the port is just the stage design and boss design, because I have to say I really like both approaches here. Again, it sounds a little bit redundant, but it is really a fusion between a cave style stage design and a Yogawa, Batrider, Battle Garegga style stage, where there's definitely a lot of bullets on the screen, and there are some sections that feel very cave-like in the way they're set up. But for the most part, it also has that more naturalistic, loose feel of the Garegga enemy design and stage design. It's a little bit hard to explain, but it feels a little less contrived than a cave shmup, a cave bullet hell, where it's like the waves come at you and the waves are very designed. Where I've always felt like what's cool about Garegga is that organized chaos, basically, where there's a lot of enemies spawning in all different directions, but it just works, but it feels really naturalistic. And so when you're playing, you probably won't exactly go along the same way. And of course, I forgot to mention, because it's so obvious, I forgot to mention, is that the scoring system also has the medaling, just like in Battle Garegga. That fits with the stage design here, where Cave, you can't really throw medals into that style of stage design because of just how restricted it is. But with Battle Garegga and with Ibara, you have medals because you can just move around. There's definitely a way you want to route it, but it's a more natural, loose sort of feel to it, which again I think is really cool, and I'm really glad it mashes those together really nicely. And there's also mid bosses like in Cave, which is really cool. Then the boss fights themselves are really fun and really interesting. One thing that Ibara seems to want to make you do is fly up above the bosses a lot. That's just something, once you understand the game seems to want you to do that a lot, the boss fights become a lot more manageable, because some of those patterns it launches at you are absolutely crazy. Then you realize, oh, I'm supposed to just macro around this entire pattern and get around the top of it. But if it's the first time you're playing the game and you start seeing that, you're like, this game's broken. And also, if you don't understand about the Hadoken or whatever, the charged bomb shot, I think you're going to get yourself in some real sticky situations, where I remember even stage 2 boss, when I was first playing it, I was like, whoa, this game is brutal. How are you supposed to dodge these patterns? But then I realized, oh, you're supposed to use this bomb attack or fly up around them. So the boss fights are a ton of fun. They got a lot of like really cool graphical design. I think the one thing that I really wish could happen is that I feel like the graphical ambition of the game is a little bit more demanding than the hardware can quite deliver, even on arcade, even on MAME. The thing is I've never been able to see a clean arcade run of this game, because all the arcade videos are in like 240p, and if you want to get Ibara on PCB, it's $4,000. So I don't think many people have Ibara laying around. But from what I can tell, it just seems when you're playing it in MAME, even though it's clear in MAME, because MAME can, bring up the resolution and everything, there just has this noisy quality to the graphics and stuff. So I think this game would really benefit from like a Ketsui Detini or Revision 2016 treatment where they cleaned up the textures a little bit. That would actually be really cool. But anyway, let's start talking about the PS2 port because I know a lot of people will be interested in this. So I did a little bit of research. The PS2 port came out in 2006, February of 2006, which is right at the end of the PS2, of course. So it's one of those late release shmups on consoles, which means, of course, it's expensive and limited. And so I was looking up on eBay, how much is the price of this bad boy? And it's like $300. Whoa, for a PS2 release. I was talking to some of the people, especially Plasmo, about me reviewing the PS2 port. He's like, "Oh, you're just gonna stomp on it with your boot of death," because I am known for being a very harsh critic on ports. The thing about Ibara is that it is well known, even outside of my more harsh viewpoint, that the port has issues. The thing about it, though, that is sort of a saving grace for the PS2 port that other PS2 ports don't benefit from, specifically Mushi, is that there are no other ports of Ibara, and emulation of the game is not that solid either. You can't play it in Shmup Arch, and MAME doesn't quite run it all that well. It's one of those later releases, right? It's like the Mushi era where it can't quite run it the way it wants to. You can still run it on MAME, but it's laggy, the timing isn't quite right. So the PS2 port, while it has issues, isn't totally void because it does have advantages that you can't even get on emulation. So I'm going to first start talking about the advantages it gives you, and then of course the disadvantages. And honestly, I feel like if you really want to go all in on Ibara, you probably will need to play the PS2 port for some reasons, which I'll get into. There are two main reasons why the PS2 port is worthwhile looking into. The first one is that the input lag is just lower than it is on MAME. It's not super responsive. I didn't bother to break out the lag test light or anything like that, but I'm telling you now, it's not super responsive, but it's definitely more responsive than MAME, maybe a frame or two. It's hard to tell, but it is more responsive, so there's that. Another really big thing about the PS2 port that I really appreciate, and I think is probably the main reason to play it, is that it has a rank bar. So you can see your rank. There's like a graphical indication of your rank. That's a pretty big deal. Now, there may be some kind of ROM hack out there that allows you to do that in MAME, but as far as I'm aware, I haven't come across that. So one cool thing about the PS2 port for even serious players is you can see your rank and you can route stuff out because it has a little rank graph. The drawback of the PS2 port, the big one, is that the slowdown is not correct. The game runs too quickly. The thing is that MAME runs too quickly as well, but I'm sure with some tweaking and with getting in the settings, you could probably get that a little bit more arcade accurate. But yeah, the PS2 port runs too quickly. The thing about it is it's not just that it's missing slowdown, it's just running too fast. So the bullets move faster, everything moves faster, even just on a baseline. So that makes the game a little bit harder. From what I understand, though, some pretty serious scores have been achieved on the PS2 port. So how much of a difference that makes? The problem is Ibara's in this limbo, though, is that Ibara's PCBs are rare and expensive. So I don't think many people are going to be playing on the PCB. It doesn't have a massive scoring scene either, right? So it's not like Donanpachi where there's a good amount of people playing on PCB, right? And then the other part is the emulation on MAME is okay, but it's not that great. So you're in this situation where it's hard to actually say what the best way to play Ibara is. Probably a combination of MAME and PS2. Another huge drawback of the PS2 version that I definitely want to talk about are the graphics, because this was done by Cave on the PS2, like the Mushi port. Again, the thing with the Mushi port is they're just way better versions. There's the 360 version and the Steam version, and then there's also MAME, which is kind of okay-ish, right? The thing about Ibara is there is no 360 version. There is no Steam version. And so you get these awful graphics. There is a hack that I did. I'll link it in the video description here. We can go in and change the hex values of the ISO, and it removes, I think it's the interlacing. So it removes the interlacing, but it doesn't remove the filtering. So the way it works is actually kind of jank, where if you're holding still, the game looks pretty clear, looks pretty crystal. As soon as you move, though, it blurs a bit. So it still looks kind of crappy, but that does reduce the graphical messiness a little bit. Another thing about the PS2 port that's a big issue is there are load times. What the hell? I don't know why. We're on the PS2 here. But yes, there are. I'm guessing the textures are just huge or something, but there are load times like Neo Geo CD style. They're not as long, but when you're in training mode and you do the boss select, it could be like 30-second load times, 15-second load times. It can be a while. Again, there might be a bit of a homebrew solution for this where, so I was USB loading the game, I'll just admit that, but I'm going to get a network adapter for my PS2 and you can actually load the ISOs through that and it's actually faster. So that may cut down on the load times a little bit, even over having the actual disc. So there's another kind of homebrew solution to maybe an issue like that. The thing about the PS2 port is actually pretty solid as far as the features it includes. So it has Tate, of course, so that's necessary. A cool thing is that it rotates both ways, which most ports don't do. And in some situations, some people have monitors that don't turn left, they only turn right or whatever. It sounds silly, but I actually had that for a while. So I appreciate that it rotates both ways. It has a training mode that's fairly solid, but a little bit strange. So the way the training mode works is that you can stage select, which is nice, and you can basically do the stage or the boss. There's no mid boss, unfortunately. But the weird thing about it is that when you go in to select your stage, you can't change any of the factors. So you can't go ahead and change your bomb count. You can't change your power count. You can't change your rank. You can't do any of that. So at first I thought, oh, okay, so the training mode's basically useless or mostly useless. However, if you go in, there's like this weird pseudo-esque save state system you can do where if you go into the training mode and then you go into data, instead of doing default, you switch it to data 1 or whatever slot you want to do. You do data and then you play the training mode from stage 1. The thing is that it basically saves states every time you do a boss fight and go into the next stage. So you play stage 1, let's say you mess it up, you restart. And it has a quick restart function, which is nice. So you quick restart, though there's a load time, which sucks. But you quick restart, and then you keep doing it until you like how you did the stage. And then you go into the boss fight, and you do the boss fight. And let's say you don't like the way the boss fight went. You go ahead and hit restart, and it'll actually jump you back to the boss fight. Then you can redo the boss fight over and over. And then when you go into stage 2, it actually saves your information from stage 1. And you can do this throughout the entire game. So it's like this pseudo save state system. It's actually really good, which means you can actually create a route. And so when you go into load stage 4, for instance, and you use your data line on there, then you can go into it with your rank that you have adjusted and worked for and routed out. So you actually can do effective practice on the port. The only issue being that you have these obnoxious load times, but that's better than not having it. So there is a way to use this PS2 port to learn the game, especially with that rank graph. The last thing about the PS2 port that I want to comment on that's really cool and worth checking out is the arrange mode. And the arrange mode is basically, let's turn this into a cave game where you get concentrated fire, and you can select your weapons. The bombing, I forgot to mention this, the bombing is actually a little bit more cave-like than Garegga, where you have some invul on your bomb. And then on this, it's just more cave-like. It's basically switching it to where the arcade version feels like Garegga mostly, and then with the arrange, it's like you're playing a cave game now. It's actually really fun. I like the arrange a lot. Again, a main selling point of the PS2 port, I would say, is the arrange version, but it comes with a flaw. The flaw being that there is no training mode for the arrange version, and you cannot credit feed it. It forces you to restart when you game over. So, and I think Cave released some kind of ROM that I think is like Black Label or something. That's a little bit that I believe is kind of based on the arranged version. So it's also worth checking that out on MAME and stuff. That's not available on the port. But overall, I think the port is useful to use. I don't know if you necessarily have to drop $300 for it, but if you're hardcore like that, or if you have a hacked PS2, which I think everyone should hack their PS2s, maybe there's a way around spending $300. I mean, maybe. So anyway, overall, absolutely fantastic game. Highly recommended. Definitely worth your time. You need to get a little bit creative with how you're going to approach the game. What we really need is we really do need some kind of M2 style release of this game. I think more so than even Batrider, to be honest. I know people love Batrider and they want that one over Ibara. The thing is that you can play Batrider in like MAME, Shmup Arch really well for the most part. Whereas Ibara you can't. So for me, I always kind of want to see the M2 ports for games that aren't really that well emulated, except Dodonpachi because I want to use that in Japanese events. But other than, and I want to see Dodonpachi campaign. But overall, I would love to see a re-release of this. I think it is definitely a prime candidate for that M2. If you guys can make it happen, I don't really trust anyone else to do it. So hopefully, maybe someday before they stop doing them, we get an Ibara release. Absolutely, really cool. Or if we saw it on Exa, right? That wouldn't affect me very much unless I become a baller and invest in an Exa cab. But anyway, I absolutely love the game. Hope you all check it out. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll thank my patrons. So thank you to Dingo, Handicapped, Anthony A, Ben Win, Borgie22, Corio, Disco Star Slayer, Dominic NG, Eric H, Full Set, Retro Schmupper, Hausu, Kiwi, JLab, JB RPG, Joe Angelo, Gameboy Guru, K, Malaise, Mark Toms, Martin Worrell, Maz, Meher Calendrian, Queen Charlene, Nathaniel Davis, N Electron, Okla Kugels, Philip Mason, Ram Q, Raul, Smacky Factor, TRM, Sugumo, Plasmo, and Utsukaya. Thanks for watching.